Okay, Jaxie's going to be joining in on this video with us, but this is how I got into veterinary school tips and tricks. So right around this time of the year, I know you guys probably watching this have just submitted your application, so congrats. I know that was a lot of work. And now you're waiting for interviews or you're starting interviews. So to provide you with a little bit of background about my own experience and my process, I actually took 2 cycles to get in. My first cycle, I applied right at the end of my 3rd year of college. So I was going through, I still had a lot of prerequisites outstanding, and I still had not had the chance to get into a whole lot of large animal or exotics. So I kind of knew in the back of my mind there was a slim chance I was gonna get in, but I wanted to apply to get some feedback about what I could work on in the future. Why I graduated in 3 years was always a goal of mine because I knew I wanted to take a gap year. So I wanted a whole year off of vet med. So after I applied, I received feedback. I applied to The Ohio State University and Cornell. Both of them had the same feedback to give me, which was my grades are great. It was just the lack of breadth of animal experience because I was primarily small animal. So I graduated in May, and then I started a job at Nemacolin Woodlands Resort at the zoo. So that is where I got the majority of my exotic and large animal experience. And then after that, I started a job in leasing. I wanted to take that gap year. I wanted to just work, get some money. When it came time to submit my application, I had a total of 9 schools that I applied to. 7 of them were offering interviews, and then the other 2 did not interview for out-of-state students. The 2 schools that weren't doing interviews, I did not get into. I got waitlisted and rejected. And then the other 7 that were offering interviews, I was offered an interview at, and then I was accepted to all 7 of those schools. And that's not to brag, that's just saying I think how I prepared and how confident I was going in is probably the reason that I got in. And ultimately, when it came down to choosing what school I wanted to get into, I did choose The Ohio State University. And it was for a various amount of reasons. For me, it was the one closest to home. They are a very highly ranked school. But I also felt very comfortable, and everybody here made me feel welcomed. They had a dinner the night before, and that is pretty much was the selling point for me. You know, a lot of our professors are the ones that write the textbooks that, you know, you study in vet med. So we're learning from those vets or veterinarians. So that's ultimately why I chose it. But there was not one interview that I came out of where everyone wasn't extremely nice and extremely encouraging, because once they offer you an interview, you have a chance to get into that school. So it's just all about your personality and seeing if they could see you being at that school as well. So, you know, out of the 7, there wasn't one school where I thought anyone was rude or mean, and I could have seen myself at pretty much every one of those schools. But the ultimate reason, you know, why I chose OSU was for the things I previously mentioned. If you guys are like me, you first find out you get an interview. I got my first interview at Midwestern out in Arizona, and you're very excited, and you know, you finally feel like, okay, this is my dream, it's coming true. I can finally see, you know, the light at the end of the tunnel. And then panic completely ensues over you. You think, you know, what are they going to ask me? How am I going to talk? What am I going to say? So to prepare myself, what I would do for each school first was I printed out a ton of resumes, and the schools will tell you if they want you to provide a resume or not. So I had a whole folder of my resume, and then if they were to ask it, I had it handy. And know this front and back. What you're putting on your resume, they can ask you, it's free game if they know your information previously. So each school is a little bit different, and they will tell you whether or not they will be researching your information before you walk into the interview. Some of the interviewers will have already read your whole application. Some of them have never seen a thing. They don't know a grade. And then some of the schools, 2 of the ones that I went to were Virginia, Maryland, and Lincoln Memorial, were considered multiple mini interviews. So this isn't just a normal sit-down face-to-face interview. You were actually interviewed. It's like 8 stations. So each door you go into had a different prompt, and then you just answer the prompt and you talk about it. There were pros and cons to each interview. I personally actually liked the multiple mini interviews because every interview you went into, it was a clean slate. You got graded individually. So if you felt that you didn't do well on one station, you could get, you know, you kill the next one. So that is something you need to research as well. What kind of interviews are they asking, or how are their interviewers going? And then that'll help you gauge what kind of questions they may ask. So what I did was look up fact sheets for every single school that I was going to, or I made fact sheets. So I knew the mission statement of every school. I knew who the dean was. I knew different outreach programs that they were a part of. So this is my fact sheet from Ohio State, just as an example. And then I looked up a ton of example interview questions. So, I mean, if you guys, tons. I mean, it's very large. There's a lot of them, and there's probably 20 some pages of possible interview questions you can find right off the internet. I can't explicitly talk about specific interview questions because you do sign a lot of NDAs. Just a general overview before I get into the actual interview. Once you get to wherever you're interviewing at, you will receive some type of folder or paper that's going to have kind of a layout of the day. And they'll give you, various times, what you're doing, if there's a speaker in the morning. But when you get there, you're going to be extremely nervous, which is usual. But for me, I think what helped, if you have any parents that like to talk or are very friendly or outgoing, my parents definitely helped me. They calmed me down. And it's easier if you have somebody there that you can talk to instead of going at it alone, if you're lucky enough to be able to bring another person with you, because it does make you feel better if you have someone there sitting to talk to. And if you didn't bring anybody with you, find another interviewer and see if you can talk to them, because you might see them in another interview, and then it's kind of like you have a connection and you have someone that you can talk to. So it also helps if you are talking instead of just sitting there, because you are just going to get more nervous if you're kind of sitting in the corner waiting for your turn. And again, helping with my parents made friends. I would walk out of my interviews and they had like 5 friends already made, whether if it was a professor or another student. My advice for you guys, some things that I did was I contacted my veterinarian vet that I worked for back home, and I asked her how she would approach some of the ethical questions as far as euthanasia and things like that, because you will get asked a lot of ethics-based questions and how you feel about euthanasia and different scenarios and how you would handle them. So for me, it was getting another outside opinion. So talk to people, ask people questions before you go in, and feel like you're prepared, because when you're prepared for your interview, you're going to feel a lot more confident. I also researched current events that were going on in the veterinary world, but that is not to scare you. If they ask you a question that you're unaware of and that you don't know, it is okay to say, I'm not entirely sure. That would be something I have to research later. And take a pause if they ask you a question and you have to think about it. They would rather see you sit there for a few seconds and then answer the question than just kind of word vomit. A lot of us veterinarians say, or future veterinarians say, we've wanted to do this since we were 3 years old. But what I think I did and how I stood out a little bit more was I had a ton of animal experience, but I also was able to get out and experience other things that wasn't in vet med. I've worked at a bank, I've worked in construction, I worked at an asphalt plant. So for me, it was saying, I know that vet med, it can be a very hard track. It's a long, a lot of time, it's a lot of money, but I was able to experience a lot of other things. And then I've always circled back around to what I wanted to do, which is this. So I was very passionate about it, and be able to talk about characteristics that you have of why you think that you would be a great veterinarian and why you think that you would fit in at that school. I didn't just pick 9 random schools. I would research the schools before I applied to see if I could see myself there and see if they would be a good fit. And also remember, when they are interviewing you, it is more of a conversation than an interrogation. You are interviewing them just as much as they are interviewing you. This is the next 4 years that you're going to invest time and money into, that you want to see if you can see yourself there. So don't be as nervous. I know it's a lot easier said than done. My first interview at Midwestern, I came out of the interview room crying. I called my parents. I was like, listen, we don't need to do the tour. I'm not getting in. Let's just go home. And I ended up staying on the tour. I went through. I was very discouraged. I thought my interview went horrible. I felt like I couldn't answer questions. I was pausing. I asked them if I could restart. And that was the first school that I found out I got into. So if you feel like you come out of an interview and you tanked it, chances are you probably didn't. and you just feel like you did a lot worse. And another thing that I did was I would come out of interviews and I would write down questions that they asked me and how I would answer them to better prepare myself for the next interview. I knew I had 6 ahead of me after Midwestern, and if I knew that there could be a potential question they might ask again in another interview, I knew I wanted to have a better answer than what I said the previous time. So I mean, my whole notebook, I had a whole binder, and every school I had, it was just different questions. And something that isn't necessarily interview related when it comes to speaking, but when you do go into a room, make sure that you always shake their hands and keep eye contact with them the entire time. Some of them might purposely be looking at the clock the whole time to kind of throw you off. That's something that they may do, but always try to make eye contact, shake their hands. I know this year, I'm not quite sure because of COVID if they're going to be doing Zoom interviews, I'm not sure, but practice where you should look into the camera. And then something I also did was if they provide you with the interviewer's name and there might be an address, or you can just send it to the school, write a thank you card after the interview. They do appreciate that. So I did have thank yous and I would write them down as well. So, summarize how to prepare yourself. Like I said, research questions you could potentially be asked and actually answer them. Look up current events. Look up the public health side of vet med if you're not interested in it. If I was completely small animal medicine, but I researched things that you could do in public health because there is a lot of other opportunities in vet med that we may not realize, and they want to see that you've researched that. And then again, research each individual school and how they are interviewing, whether it's multiple minis, whether it's a one-on-one, whether there is an instructor and maybe 2 other people in the room. So that is going to help determine and better prepare you for when you actually get in there so you're not as nervous. But my final, thought for everything is just be comfortable and be yourself. Know what you want to say and how you want to sell yourself in that room. And if you feel like you've gone through the whole interview and you haven't really said the things that you've wanted to say, do it at the end, because they're always going to leave a few minutes for you to say, is there anything else you'd like to tell us about yourself? So for me, there were, various key points that I thought, about me and why I think I would be a good fit for the program that I wanted to make sure I got across, and, different character skills and traits about myself. And then after the interview is over, always ask questions. They're going to say, do you have any questions about the school? Research that. Know things about their school that you're going to ask, and different programs they might offer. You want to see that you're invested in the school as well. So leave the interview asking questions. Don't just sit there for the remaining 3 minutes because it's awkward. But apart from that, be comfortable and be yourself. Don't feel like it's an interrogation, because it's not. They are just there to talk to you. It is more or less a conversation. And I know it's a lot easier said than done, because I knew I was definitely nervous going into every interview. But once you got in there and you sat down for the first 30 seconds, just talk to them and tell them about yourself. And do not be nervous. So I hope that this was helpful. I hope this can ease anyone's trepidations that they have about school or the interview process. Ask me any questions that you guys have, DM me. I'll be happy to answer anything that you guys want to know or ask. But that is my journey, and I hope that I was able to help at least one of you, and I hope you guys all do really well in your interviews and get into every school.